Okay, like I said, my name is Vijay. I am this guy here. I run the group JavaScript LA. I've been doing it for about, I want to say this is like my 5th year, but like we really weren't a big group until like 3 years ago. So we have meetups every month in Los Angeles and Orange County. We usually cover JavaScript topics, but we're trying to branch out and do more, programming related topics. A little bit about me. This is, the official JavaScript website, and I've been doing programming for about, I want to say 8 years, but take that with a grain of salt because I did most of my programming. I came from the marketing side. So I worked as a digital admin assistant, like doing ads back in the early 2000s for sales stuff. Like we were using Yahoo for doing advertising. And then around that time, we also had email campaigns that had to get scheduled out. So I dabbled in a lot of that. And then over time, I decided, maybe I'll really learn this stuff. So I'm self-taught. I spent a lot of time, just kind of learning different APIs over the years, and also teaching myself web development. And then as of recent, I had lived in Los Angeles for almost 4 years, and I was working here for various ad agencies and some of the movie production studios that you probably have heard of. So I worked on some films for Adam Sandler. I did stuff for Lionsgate, Sony. Then after that, I started working at a moving company and that was a different departure from what I was traditionally doing in Hollywood. But we did a lot of landing pages using PHP and Zend framework, if anybody has used that before. And that's where I started to really kind of learn the whole MVC kind of back end, front end, maybe start to call myself more of a full stack developer as opposed to just a front end. Then after that, I had my first child and I moved to Orange County. Well, I still live in Long Beach, but like I work in Orange County. And so that's where I'm coming from today. And I have been working in the medical industry and doing a lot of websites there. And it's still a lot of, similar stuff. A lot of it is still old legacy kind of stuff, PHP. But then there's a lot of opportunity to do new things too. Most recently, we were able to move a lot of our websites from, hosting sites like GoDaddy and Pantheon and all this stuff over to Amazon. So I was kind of like in charge of that project and making sure that everything kind of got moved over. And that was a good project. That was fun. And it gives us a lot of opportunity now to do things beyond just traditional LAMP stack. We can run a Node.js server, several of them. We can do a lot of things like React, Angular. And so, this past 2 years, I spent more of my time really just kind of learning, and watching. So you don't really get to see me a lot, but I usually have people come speak at this group every month. And I usually invite people who have pretty good programmer backgrounds to come give a talk. Mainly because like I was also, in the background, handling other things. Like, I have my daughter, and then also managing this group is very difficult on top of working. So just a lot of different things. But long story short, I like being up here. I like giving talks. I like, presenting because it forces me to get knowledgeable about different topics. And that said, for anybody here who feels that same way too, like if you really want to give a talk and you feel like this could help you in some way, please come see me afterwards or message me afterwards online. For those of you who don't know, I'll just say it, like we have a chat channel and it's called Discord, and you can get to it from our website. It's javascriptla.net. That's our website. And we have a Discord. We also have a Slack, but I don't advertise it as much because Slack has a cap on how many people you can have join. But this is kind of like a replacement for the Slack channel, and I think it's a really good one. Discord is more, geared at gamers, but for whatever reason, they built a very good app. And so I like it for, just having conversations. So I encourage you all to join that. Does anybody have any questions so far on anything I've covered? Yes?
I didn't know you were trying to branch out to topics outside of JavaScript.
Yeah, definitely. So I'll kind of touch upon that, and then I'll probably bring it back to like the Angular presentation. Mm-hmm. But afterwards, I'll probably also talk about it towards the end too. But you do see there's a little logo here. It's the beginning. It's called HackBuddy. And eventually, this is going to help us branch out of just the JavaScript landscape. Right now, I just have a simple landing page here. So this is called Survive Programming. It's a roadmap to ES6. This is a simple little video course that I put together. I'll probably put it on Udemy as well. These are a lot of just like, people recommending me. Like there's, I guess, testimonials about who I am and what I've done, how much. For those of you who don't know, I used to teach at General Assembly also. I'm currently teaching at Thinkful, for those of you who haven't heard of that. So I have a lot of students behind me that really do like my work. And so that said, like I said, I have a course here for anybody who's trying to learn ES6. I also have a book on Amazon. And again, I don't want to spend a ton of time like plugging, but I just do want you to be like aware of who I am and what I've done. So if you get the book or if you get this video series, and we're going to add more programming topics otherwise, not just like my ES6 course, but we're going to have like a different variety of courses and stuff available to you. So if you're somebody who's really interested in learning this stuff and you are more on the beginner side, definitely get it and support the group. The money that you put into the group helps us, manage and bring out speakers that are very expensive, as well as hotel accommodation, stuff like that. All right, so let's get into the actual presentation for today. And like I said, this is probably going to be the first, I may like do more follow-up topics with time, just given basic feedback from how I did with today in Orange County. We've had several people in the room raise their hands, show that they've done something with Angular. That's great. I want to see a show of hands again one more time. How many people here have not used Angular?
What do you mean by used?
Like you've not even touched it.
Oh.
Okay. How many people here are aware of it, but they've not really done anything with it? Okay. A little bit more. Okay. So we'll go into like all the basics here. So what is Angular? For a lot of people that are interested, it's a JavaScript framework. And by framework, I mean something more than just writing vanilla code by yourself, right? What does a framework help us solve? Does anybody know? Yes?
Helps us keep the view and state with the models?
More simply put, if you had to explain what a framework was to your grandma, what would you say?
Base of code, so you're not writing everything from scratch.
Yes, that's more close. Anything else, though?
It helps us solve repetitive problems, repetitive things that we have to normally do over and over again. It gets packaged into a framework so that we don't have to redo those things from scratch.
That's exactly right. That's a good answer right there. Okay, let's make sure he gets a sticker afterwards. All right, so yeah, a framework is used to help solve a lot of common problems that you might have. With regards to web development, it makes sense to have a framework in JavaScript because when you write in JavaScript, you're going to do a lot of repetitive stuff, and it helps to have something get you out of the way so you can bootstrap faster, if you understand what I mean. Like you can get started with doing web development faster. Another thing about Angular is it is declarative and not imperative. Does anybody know what I mean by that? No one?
Declarative?
Declarative versus imperative. What is that paradigm? Does anybody know?
Declarative programming is about writing some boilerplate, writing some degree of boilerplate to automate a lot of processes and tasks within that the framework already knows to handle, whereas imperative is what we classically think of as programming, which is just writing instructions to do everything, single thing, line by line.
Exactly. So declarative versus imperative, right? Imperative, you just write. You just you do jQuery this, jQuery that, connect this DOM element to this function, right? And then on click do this, and then, oh my God, another table I just created, in HTML. Now I got to wire this thing up and, connect it to an event handler. That's imperative. You're not really thinking about like the future or how the app is going to scale. Whereas if you write in a declarative way, which is how Angular is structured, you are thinking about future app development, how your app might actually scale. And so this is a better paradigm. You don't want to always be coding in an imperative style. Sometimes there are good use cases for it. I mean, if you have a simple app or something you want to just bang out right now, you want to prototype something and you don't really want to think like too hard, it might make sense to just come up with a quick solution. But afterwards, and you know this, afterwards you might want to just abstract a little bit and think, okay, how can we make this a little bit better? So next time Pyle asks me, hey, can you make this a little bit better? Can you scale this for 40 people, for 100 people? I won't have to sit there and be like, oh my God, how do I rewrite this? All right, so it gives our code superpowers from Google. And that's a huge benefit of using Angular, right? You get this guy behind you, helping you do some code. I don't know if he actually works at Google, but you get some massive brain power, behind you. There are some good practices. And so my whole thing for using a framework over doing it myself is that I get to learn from this kind of community. I get to see, oh, okay, where are the Google guys going? What are the Facebook people doing? And sometimes it might be over my head. Honestly, I don't claim to stand here and be the best programmer in front of all of you. I think that would be a huge lie. I'm just one of you, so I'll also make mistakes. And because I make mistakes, it's good to just have reference points and be like, okay, this is a good way of solving a problem. Maybe I could incorporate some of this for the next challenge I have. I guess the last point here is that Angular works well with what you've already been using so far. So if you can run a basic Apache server, you should be able to run Angular on the front end. So that's a nice thing. What version is Angular in? Does anybody know? Okay. And what is the difference between Angular and AngularJS?
One is not maintained anymore.
Are you sure?
Actually, I'm not sure, but one is not recommended to use by Google.
One is not recommended to use by Google anymore, but it is maintained.
Oh, they still maintain it?
Well, they have the code base available, but they don't promote it actively. They tell everybody who wants to do Angular to use 8. Is there going to be a 9? A 10? 11? Yeah?
6-month-ish release cadence.
Yeah. Why? Because that's just how it works in the world of Google, right? You have a lot of different products competing against each other, and they just want to keep refining. So like, why Angular versus something else like React? I get this question a lot. Vue, jQuery, Squarespace. Does anybody use Squarespace? Okay. All right. So because essentially, I'll go through like each part, right? React and Vue are concerned with the V in MVC, right? The view part. Whereas Angular is the whole thing, model view controller. And if you do want to use model view controller with React or Vue, then you need to incorporate other things. There's a lot more tooling required. Whereas with Angular, you kind of get stuff out of the box, ready to go. As I mentioned before, jQuery is imperative. WordPress, Squarespace, that stuff is not really meant for a programmer. It's more just for people who are busy. They want to use something that can just function as a quick, one-off site. It's not something that you can code on top of, because that's what you get, right, when you buy a Squarespace site or a WordPress site. Although WordPress is pretty good, you're essentially just taking what is already out there and you're saying, okay, I just want a fast blog or I just want a Squarespace. So again, you're not going to get that benefit of being able to use top level code or cutting edge code if you're going to go down that route. And actually, that's a really good point, because I feel like it may be funny to you guys, like as developers, that I'm saying this, but your job also at time is to explain to people who are non-technical what the differences are between these different, frameworks and architectures, right? Because your job may be on the line, right? So you have to be able to explain these different points. Why not use Angular? And I have to be careful with this slide because I got in trouble for it last time. I'll just get this out of the way. Why not use Angular? Because you're a conspiracy theorist, right? You don't believe in Google. But that said, that's a joke for anybody who didn't really get that. Google products are sometimes in beta. And, like we talked about, Angular 1 was dropped. And so, you might spend a whole lot of time building an app on Angular's framework, and then suddenly support's gone, sorry. And Google's notorious for that. If you like support, I recommend Microsoft. They do a pretty good job of supporting stuff till the bitter end. Angular is hard, okay? I don't think of this framework as actually easy to get into. I feel like it's very, very, very difficult, and I think Google likes difficult for some reason. But that said, don't let that discourage you, because you want to get, good insight from using something like this. So if you're somebody who is really busy and you don't have the time and money and patience to learn this stuff, I don't recommend this. But if you have time, you have availability, and you can, practice this on the side, your company allows that, that's great. And you might be able to start doing stuff that's interesting. Okay. So I'm going to try to jet through some of these slides given our time today. I don't know how much time we have. But first off, I'll start off with the CLI tool. Does anybody here know what a CLI means? Command line, what? Interface, okay. What is a command line interface?
So you use a bash, you just type in bash and just stuff, magic happens.
Magic happens? Okay. What is bash? Shell scripting language, okay. Yeah, basically, there are two parts to the computer, right? Well, this is an oversimplification, but you have the desktop and you have the command line, right? The desktop is this thing, right? There's my, I don't know who this is. I think this is actually Michelangelo. And I've got all my apps on the side. That's the desktop. And then I've got the command line, which is this thing. I can type commands into it and generally get stuff done. Now, the reason you use the command line is to help you speed up your web development in this case, right? Because there are certain things that you might do that are very time consumptive, like writing out, files and folders, installing dependencies. When you use something like React, you kind of have to get into the tooling. You kind of have to npm init, install Webpack or hot module reloading. And sometimes that can take a lot of time, and you don't want to sit there fighting with different types of dependencies and different versions. You just want to be able to do web development. And so a command line interface tool like the Angular CLI helps us save time. It looks like we have screens, so if you're not able to see the text, you should be able to look at the wall too and probably read. If anybody wants me to bump up the font, just let me know. But that said, the Angular CLI helps us create new modules, components, test files. It gives us basically everything we need to do to be able to get it working out of the box. And this is one of the reasons I actually like Angular 8. Getting set up is pretty easy. If you have Node.js, which you would install on your computer, you can just type with your terminal, npm install -g. What does -g mean?
Global.
Global, and what does that mean?
This installs it to all the users. Well, actually, sorry, no, it installs it in a path where it's available to to your user, and it's available in paths, so you don't have to access the binary from a specific folder.
Yeah, very good. So yeah, you install this and make it available for anybody on the machine. And the syntax here says @Angular/CLI, so just be aware of that. Then after you do that, you will, in order for you to start your first Angular project, you'll use the command ng new followed by the project name. And then don't forget to cd into your project. If you're going to start doing Angular commands, I've often made that mistake, so I'm just giving you that here. So we can do that, but what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to show you the Angular docs. And I'm going to recommend to you 2 things to do, especially if you've never done Angular, right? This is your homework tonight. All right, so what I recommend first is going through the Getting Started with your Angular, your first app tutorial. And the nice thing is that they have something called Stack Blitz. I guess this is a partnership that they have. And what you can do is you can start coding in Angular without having to install anything on your machine. You can just, this is kind of like the future. Nowadays, you do coding in a browser. Even Amazon has started to do this. You can do all of your code inside, something called Cloud9, and you don't have to install anything on your actual machine, and then you can resume coding anywhere. So I really like that. I think it's a cool concept. So over here, you can see that I've got all my files on the left-hand side, and then I've got the code that I want to be concerned with here in the middle, and then on this side is the web browser. Okay, and then another nice thing too is if I right-click, I can use something called Angular Generator, and I'll be able to create components, services, directives, modules, pipes, whatever I want. This is pretty nice. Okay, so I've made an app already with this, and I believe it's called Angular 8-tutorials-v. And again, this is a very simple one, so not a lot to expect out of this particular one. But here I just went through the tutorial, and like I said, there happens to be a lot of retro theme with our group, so I made this a vaporwave store. I'll just kind of talk about this a little bit quickly, right? So you got a lot of buttons. You have products. You can click on a button. It does stuff. Okay, so the middle here, we have something called a component.ts. What does TS mean?
TypeScript.
Okay, what is TypeScript?
It's a version of JavaScript.
What kind of a version of JavaScript?
Superset.
It's a superset of JavaScript. It's a stricter version of JavaScript. Why do we need to be strict with JavaScript? Why? What's that?
The Java developer, they go to the JS and then they like everything to be
Yeah.
strict, so
Yeah, exactly. Right. So you have people from various backgrounds approaching JavaScript, not just your traditional web developer, people who have done Java, people who have done C, right? When you work at Google, I guess, because I have friends there, there are a lot of people, the first thing they actually tell you if you want to get a job at Google is learn Java, and data structures, because that's what 99% of everything is over there. Okay, so, but that said, they want to, rewrite everything, and they have this, typed paradigm in them, in their minds, the strict paradigm, right? The thing about JavaScript, and I don't know if you know this, is that you already get type inference from JavaScript's compiler, so you don't really need to worry about it. That's why you can just write a variable and then set it to a string in quotes, and JavaScript just knows what to do. Or you can put a number as the value. JavaScript already knows it might be an int or Boolean or whatever, right? You don't actually have to say what it is specifically. JavaScript takes care of that for you. But when you're being strict and you're working with, code, you do want to be careful about it. So here, if you want to get TypeScript, and actually I'm going to go back to my slide real quick too. So we're going to dive into Angular features right now. So the first one is TypeScript, and this is good, we're making time. Like I said, it's a more verbose way of JavaScript. The biggest problem with writing code in JavaScript is porting code from other languages. Let's say, right, we talked about rewriting code or having code already written. That's the benefit of using a framework. You want to port your code quickly and easily over to something like JavaScript. You don't want to have to rewrite it again. That sucks. So that doesn't happen very easily with JavaScript. So TypeScript is a way of handling this problem. And the nice thing is the TypeScript is maintained by Microsoft, by the way, just so you know. And it is relatively easy to learn. I think you can take maybe a weekend to go through the architecture, the docs. And it works with the latest in ECMAScript 6 syntax. So to get it, same process, npm install -g TypeScript. And then you can start working with a TypeScript file. And to change your TypeScript into a JavaScript file, you would use the tsc command. And more about it here. The documentation's pretty good. I actually also wrote a blog post not too long ago, and I hope to write more with time, on how to use TypeScript. So it's called Intro to TypeScript. If you're interested, you can check this out. And I just kind of go through here and explain some of the basics about it, as well as how to get started, as well as some of the more complicated stuff, right? Like arrays, tuples, functions. What is the void? Does anybody know what that means?
Not type. Or technically it's not any, but it's a type, what's the word I'm looking for? It's type agnostic.
Yeah, you don't return a type. What about any? Does anybody know?
You can return anything.
Anything, yeah. Okay. Does anybody know what an enum is, or a struct, an interface?
Yeah, but you kind of define, it kind of helps in that, right?
Yeah.
So like 1 is equal to a string, 2 equals a string.
Right, like an enum, that's an enum, yeah. So interfaces are kind of like classes, but the only difference is that in a class you can inherit, whereas in an interface you don't get to inheritance. So those are all the little succinct things. Of course, if you don't know any of this, like I said, just go through, read it. Like I said, it doesn't take too long to learn. And the good benefit too from that is that after you've learned it, it becomes easy to approach other languages too, like Swift or some of the newer languages out there. So you'll be glad you've done it. And even the older ones too. For those of you who are web developers coming into Farmers and learning Angular, or coming in first as a front end, then having to deal with Java on the back end, you'll be glad you learned types. All right, so now I'm going to break down some of the Angular components here. The first one is modules, and bear with me, I'm going to do a lot of definitions. I chose to do it this way because I felt like in a first-time Angular presentation, you really do need to know some of the lingo. If you don't, you're just going to be like, man, he showed me a whole bunch of code and I still have no idea what anything he talked about was. All right, so a module, and I want to keep it interactive here. What is a module in JavaScript? So I'm looking for a little bit more of a specific answer this time if anybody wants to take a shot. Yes?
Something that can be exported, or a bunch of code that is being exported. If you're talking about modules in the new school sense, probably using the ES6 syntax, because you didn't specify what kind of moduling system you're using.
Yeah, so that's correct. I like to put it in simpler terms. It's basically code we can add to a project and then have the expectation it won't break our code. Basically, if you write any one-off piece of code, and then it's supposed to do one thing or two things, and you can import it into your project without breaking the new project, And you can think of that as a module. In Angular, you have something called ng modules, which are very similar to that concept, JavaScript modules. The difference is that ng modules control the flow of your Angular app. So you can't really use an ng module with vanilla JavaScript code. You can only use it with Angular directives, components, Angular classes. They're not really meant, maybe you could engineer it, but they're not really meant to work with other JavaScript code. So that's one thing about Angular too, right? When you start to use Angular, you give up control of what you know, and you say, you know what? Instead, I'm going to be focused on learning what Angular thinks is best. These are the best practices as per the Google team. So another thing that comes with modules are decorators. Does anybody know what a decorator is?
It's a way to annotate your code, classes, variables, functions.
Yeah, exactly. So in addition to having classes, right, you can augment your classes with decorators that give a little bit more control over how the class is supposed to act or interact with other modules, other functions. You can set, like a very simple example, you can set a certain function to be, read only or write, read and write, very similar to how you might use a bash script. In Angular, we use decorators as metadata, and we pass this as JSON, and that basically tells Angular how we expect this particular component or class to work with our actual Angular app. So we'll get to that in a second. In fact, we might as well just look at some syntax right now. So here I have some modules, some code that I'm importing, and then I have a decorator. And so you can see that here I've imported my app. And for those of you familiar with some React syntax, this might make sense. And I am setting my app component as part of this ng module for this particular app. And I'm importing other things like the browser modules. I can work with the browser. And I'm bootstrapping off of my app component. All right, so I talked about modules. Now let's talk about components. So components, you can think of them as the V, right? That makes it a lot easier to process. A component is basically the UI user experience of how your app works with the outside world. So to generate a component, you can use stack blitz, like I showed you, and just right-click somewhere and create a component. Or you can use our handy-dandy terminal and just say ng generate component, whatever, right? And for those of you who have used anything like Ruby on Rails, this should feel like that. In fact, Angular kind of borrows like a lot of like these different little things that have, transpired over the last several years. And so if you've done web development for a while, it won't actually feel that hard to learn Angular. But if you've never done any kind of web development, I don't recommend it. Okay, so anyway, when you generate a component, you're going to get a TypeScript file, you're going to get an HTML type file, and a CSS component file. And then the component.ts file is where you're going to put all of your logic for the view. So if you have used AngularJS version 1, you'll remember that you did all of your scope stuff in there, like you define what a function should do in that particular file. And we'll look at that in a second. The HTML and the CSS files, HTML is just a template file. You can basically write HTML. And Angular is smart enough to pull that up and work with it. And then CSS gets scoped to this particular component. So you don't have to worry about your CSS being called somewhere else and breaking your code. Again, we have to use a decorator to make sure that our Angular app actually understands where the template files are, the CSS files are, etc., selectors. So here's some syntax. Please don't fall. Okay. So we've got, this is the part I want you to look at, right? I don't really want you to pay too much to this until later. But here I'm saying decorator for my component. And I am saying that I want my component to be called app-product.list. And then the URL or the template file is going to be this product-list.component.html. And then all the styles are going to be here. Then, yeah, we can look at this part right here. These are where I define all of my, event handlers, things that I want to happen when I click on a certain element in my DOM, or if I just want, in general, something to happen when I'm using a particular view. What's that?
Selector.
Selector is going to be the name of your HTML component. So I'll show you in a sec, actually. In fact, let me see if I can show you from here. So, for example, what's a simple one without being too crazy? Okay, I guess I'll start at the app level. So I have something here called, right, I have div, that, h3, that, a, p tag, what app-product-alerts is?
That's just selector.
That's a selector. That's right. This, you don't know what it is, but when you use Angular with a component and you map that component to this, Angular knows, oh, okay, that's where I have to go and look. So it's like you're creating your own HTML in some ways. And that HTML is a little smarter than your regular vanilla HTML. Again, we'll get into more of that in a second. I still want to get you through the terms. All right, so that's syntax for your template file, CSS. Let's talk about directives, data binding, and pipes. And then probably this will be the last slide that I go in as far as definitions. You can talk about services and dependency injection, observables, routing, but I feel like that's it's part 2. And I want you to be like super tired. Okay, so directives basically here help us interact and modify with our HTML elements, right? The whole reason for using Angular as opposed to just writing your own HTML is that you get the benefit of being able to use something like directives, data binding, and pipes. So, for example, we can use something called structural directives, which allow us to loop over or hide and show certain elements, without having to write a jQuery handler for that. This is again, declarative as opposed to imperative. So then I also have something called attribute directives. So I can put an attribute on a certain HTML element, and we saw that a little bit, where I can have a certain class appear if some condition is met in my template. I can also have a function bound to my element and then have it do something on click. There's also data binding, which allows us to take certain elements and then send them properties, and then we can manipulate those properties on the elements in real time and show that. So I'll show you some examples of that in a sec. And then finally you have something called pipes, which allow you to take text that you've received from Angular and then maybe format it into currency or a date. And you don't have to write any of this from scratch. It's already been done for you, right? Angular's there to solve these kind of problems. You don't have to sit there and think, oh, how do I turn this, I got the response from the server. Now I have to, convert it to, a string and then turn it into a $, whatever. This is already done for you. So here, just some examples. you have star, and that's how you know like this is a structural directive. So star ngIf. So if we have the value hero name from the server, then we'll show the div. If we don't have it, no div, right? Then we have attribute. So here you can think of this as two-way data binding on this particular HTML element. So if we have the hero name, then as we type the hero name, we can show that hero name to somewhere else in our DOM if we want. And then finally we have a paragraph tag. Today is, and then if we have the value for today, we can pipe that and show the date. Okay, so like I said, I'm not going to really go into these, although for those who are very advanced, just real quick, what is a service and what does a dependency injection mean?
It's a way to share one instance among various things.
Right. So really quick, a service helps us bundle up code, and any code that's not related to the way a component should be displayed, not a UI, UX component, right? Like maybe getting some value from the server, maybe making an HTTP request, you can consider that as a service. And the nice thing is you write that service one time, you can use it with a whole variety of different components. So it's like a class in itself. It's isolated from the way your Angular app works. But if you want to write that service and then drop it into something else later, hey, great. And there's a whole bunch of services that you can also import from the Angular community. So, that's a really nice thing. Dependency injection just means, hey, we're going to take this particular service that I made and stick it into this component. Okay. And then just real quick, this is some example of that. So here, I am saying that, and this is coming from another example that I'm going to show you. So if you get through this first app on the Stack Blitz, give yourself a pat on the back or a clap. That's really good. Now go for the second one, which is harder, which is the fundamentals. Go through the Tour of Heroes app, which is also pretty difficult, but it's fun. And this will really get your feet wet with how Angular 8 works. And I have done this as well. I believe this is on my Bitbucket account, if you want to take a look. So mine is just, let's see here. Oh yeah, right here. Mine is bitbucket.org/Vijay Extreme without an E. So VJXTREME. And then after that, this is called the Angular Tour of Heroes app. So you can go into source, that's where I recommend, and then app, and then you can make your way through all these different components and services. So for example, this is a service. This is the hero service. So here, how do I want to say this? I am basically utilizing this service, or I'm making this service available for other components in my app. And basically here, from the tutorial, I've decided, all right, hey, I want to have some fake data called mock heroes. And I want to be able to do a couple different functions here. I want to provide as a service to my components the ability to get a hero, get heroes, right? Get a whole bunch of heroes in an array. And actually, this is returned as an observable. So without getting too complicated here, this is, you can see it's of type hero array. So that's the first real use of TypeScript. And then you have also get hero by ID. And for those of you who have done a lot of backend or written any kind of like REST API, this should make a little bit of sense to you. We have get, update, add, delete, search. So this is a fun one. I do recommend doing this. And if you want me to talk about it in length next time, I will. Getting back to this, we'll skip this for now. That's kind of like the basics of Angular in a nutshell. There's a lot more. And remember, your first few weeks with this are probably just going to be learning vocabulary and really just trying to make sure it hammers in your head. But that said, once you get past that, then it starts to make more sense, especially after you do the 2 tutorials that I talked about. it'll start to pick up and you'll be like, oh, okay, I got this. Now I know what I'm supposed to do or what I'm supposed to be, doing here. Make a component. Get the HTML right, the CSS right. All right, cool. That I already know. Then, okay, make sure it maps to my TypeScript file. And then have a service available so I can interact with this particular component or multiple components. And you can have components in components. So we're going to talk about this movie search app that I did. And the last time I gave a talk was in 2015, which sucks. I wish I had more time to work on giving talks, but that's why I'm here today. So somebody's phone's going off. It's not anymore. Okay, so what I'm going to show you here is this little thing called moviesearchang.firebase.com. So this is an app that I did in 2015 in React, and I redid it in Angular for this particular talk. So I can go here, I can search for something, for example, John Wick. Boom, like I get all these different movies about John Wick. So if I'm interested in finding out what happened in part 3, I can click on this and I can find out information about John Wick 3. I've seen John Wick 1 and 2, but I didn't see 3, and I really do want to see 3. So, yes?
Ask a question here. Then where does it pull this data? Do you have it in the database, or do you actually connect it to the actual site?
So yeah, this is actually going out to an API called OMDB, and basically that's Open Database Movie Database. I think that's what it is, Open Movie Database API. You need an API key to be able to make the calls, but I'll show you I'll give you an overview today. I wish we could write this app together, maybe later for YouTube or something like that. I'll probably go through this a little slower and write out like how exactly I coded this. But yeah, I mean, I can go in here, I can put Star Wars. The nice thing again, right, is you don't see a page, like I'm not going to another page to get this thing displaying. It's just all happening right now in front of you. It's very fast, and so that's why, like these things like React, Angular appeal to so many people, because you can just rebuild a web page right then and there without having to leave the app. I can look at this on my phone and expect it to work exactly the same. So that's cool. I solve a lot of problems that way. All right. Any questions so far? Okay. All right, so also just so you know, this Bitbucket account that I was talking about also has that repo as well. And that is under Movie Search Angular right here. Feel free to join our Discord and ask me. I should be able to give you the link there too if you weren't able to get it tonight.
Which version of Angular?
This is Angular 8.
2015 you said.
Oh yeah, good question. All right, so 2015, I created an app in React. And so that is on GitHub, same username. And this is the React version of that. Okay, so it's a little different, but if we go through the code, it's kind of similar, right? Instead of using TypeScript files and template files and services and all that, you kind of just go in here and you render your HTML here. You put all of your view logic here. It's a little bit similar, but it's a little different. And React is, again, like I said, not really concerned with MVC. It's more just, view logic. Okay, but it works the same way. You have movie list. You return this as JSX into your app, and then your app basically loads your search form, your movie list, and then it passes props and stuff like that. So we'll talk about the Angular version about. So let's just go through this really quickly. Before you do any programming, I really want to emphasize this. Think it out in terms of how you're going to look, how it's going to look. So maybe draw it, make a sketch. You can use something called Balsamiq. I really recommend that. It's a mock-up editor. And it's really nice because you can just create like these little things without having to like draw. I mean, I can draw, but I'm not that great at it. But the thing is, like, you can just pull these and it'll, you know, stick this anywhere you want, and then you just tweak it a little bit, and you get like a little table, or you get buttons. So try to like put these views together before you actually go to coding. So I'm going to close this and cancel. I'm not going to save. So I created this in Balsamiq. Basically, I said here, I want to have a search bar. I want to have a table. And the way that I'm going to structure it in my mind is I'm going to have a movie list component, a movie listing component, a search bar component, and then my general app. So that makes it easy for me to write that in Angular as well, because it matches. Okay, I know. Okay, I need a component for that, a component for that, a component for that. And so let's go ahead and take a look at this particular app. So I'm going to cd over to my sites folder, and I'm going to go over to Angular. I think it's there. And I'm going to use Visual Studio Code. Not Visual Studio, but Visual Studio Code, for those of you who haven't heard of that. I like this, and my friends who I often code with like this particular code editor for doing Angular work, because it will show you, you know, where you might have potential pitfalls or mistakes, and it'll help you understand, oh, you're probably, you know, you didn't specify the type, right? That's probably the thing you're going to struggle with the most, you know, trying to figure out what type is supposed to go where, whatever. So I recommend Visual Studio Code. You can use things like Atom or Sublime Text. I actually like Atom, the code editor, the most because it's not a memory hog. I really just like something that's really simple and allows me to edit very fast. I feel like using Visual Studio Code takes up a lot of my system's resources. So if you're coding on, you know, a Linux box, or you're coding in the cloud with Amazon or whatever, I don't recommend you use Visual Studio Code. I actually think that would actually make your instance run out of memory really fast, and then Jeff Bezos will be like, hey man, give me your credit card. You can like make this a little bit faster if you wanted to, right? So yeah, basically let's jump into this, right? So back at this thing, I'm going to start off with the index.html. I think that's really important. So here I have my element app root, and then I have a simple link for Bootstrap. I'm using Bootstrap version 4. That's it. Now my app is angularized. Oh, one thing that I had to do before I did all that was, does anybody remember? ng new, and then the name of my app. Because if I don't do that, nothing is going to get generated, right? I won't be able to generate all of these files. So I have to make sure I do that command, and then I'll get, you know, at least this much, right? And then the HTML. I don't have these components yet. Okay, so but let's go through them. So now I'm going to go to the app component, and I'm going to call, so I'm going to go through these, right? I have a selector called app root, which we saw, and that maps to this index.html right here. And then if I go back to over here, component TS, I have my template URL, right? And this is app.component.html. So I just need to go over to my folder and find out, well, where is that? It's right here. Okay, so that's good. Now I can start coding, right? That's the good part. I can write in a div, and then here's my h1, search for movies. Then I stick in my first Angular component called app search, right? Done, cool. Then I got like a little footer here, and that's just for people to be able to find the source code. Okay, so cool. I have this app search, but how am I going to work with this component? Remember, I have to use the command ng generate component app search, right? Or actually search, that's what it's called. And when I do that, Angular creates this folder for me called search. It has the CSS file. It has the HTML file. It also gives me a spec file, so I can do unit testing if I want. And then we have a component TypeScript file. So let's go through that really quickly. So okay, here is the component TypeScript file. And I am going to show you a few things here again. Same thing, decorator. We already talked about that. I'm naming this selector app-search. And then I want the file to be called search.component.html. And then the search.component.css. So let's look at those. Again, simple stuff. Trying to keep it simple for you guys tonight. Here is everything you need to know about writing this particular app component, right? So the search widget. So I have a div class input group, and that's just bootstrap classes. Then I have an input, and then I have some directives. So the first one here is a key up on enter. So on enter, I want to get the value of whatever has been typed into my input. And then I also have another attribute. You can think of this as a CSS directive. And basically, if there is no value, then we want to make this input show the disabled class. Again, compare this to writing jQuery or like vanilla JavaScript. It's already there. And then also I have simple HTML. I have a class form control that's bootstrap, ID, placeholder. Then I have a button, and then again I have a click handler, and I'm going to pass it to my handle. So now let's go over to our TypeScript file, and let's take a look at how those things get handled. So we saw on enter, key up on enter, we're going to get a value of type string. There's your TypeScript. And we're going to take that value, and we're going to save it in a private variable for our class concerning this search component called search term. At the beginning, this search term is blank. But because we pass it this value, search term gets updated, and now we can pass this value, the search term, over to another function called handle. So on enter, handle. And what does handle do? Well, it gets the search term again, and we just give us I put this console log here just, I think the first time I was showing off this app to show that, this particular function kicks off. But you can see down here it says, all right, I got the value. Now I'm going to use my service, right, my movie service, which is right up here. It says private movie service. And if you look up here, import search movie service from search movie service. I'll talk about that in a second. But that service is meant to help me go and search for movies. It works with my HTTP requests. So get movie by term, this dot search term. And then subscribe just means, you can think of it as like a promise syntax, right? Then, right? But we didn't talk about observables today, but observables are really similar to promises. Except promises return you one value, whereas you can have multiple returns in an observable. Okay, so I'm going to get back my movies, and then I'm going to map the results that I get and pass them off as a JSON object for my component to re-render the view. Does that make sense? All right, and here you can see this last thing here. Somebody asked me about this last time. What does dot slice mean? So what does dot slice mean?
First 4 digits.
Yes, the first 4 in my array give me. Because if we gave back the entire array, what do you think would happen? Super long list. Do we really want to have a very long list of movie results? Keep it simple. Okay, so that's how the search component works. Let's look at the service just for a second, because we did talk about services today. So again, and I think maybe this time I'll break it down a little bit more slowly. When I first built this app, I created something called fake movies. And you can ignore all the spelling error. It's not important. This is just a JSON array, So this is an array of JSON objects, and we've defined this to be of type movie array. What is that? Well, if I go over to this movie, I've created a class. Again, learn your TypeScript, this will make more sense, of type movie, and we're saying that I expect a poster, a name, a description, and an IMDb URL, all of type string. And I'm saying that I don't want any other things in there. That's all I want in my hero array, my movies array when it comes back. If I get other stuff in there, then it's probably not right. And it's just a little bit more stricter. Okay, but coming back to this, now I've imported that movie class, and then I don't actually need these fake movies because I've actually created the HTTP requests. So you can comment this out if you like. We don't really need it. But what I did was I asked Angular, right now this is getting into the framework. I need injectable and I need observable. And observable is the part we really need to pay attention to, and from something called RxJS. And what that allows me to do is, oh, and by the way, I also need these two things here, HTTP client. So I'm asking Angular for a lot of different services, and I'm saying, hey, give me these libraries, these modules, so I can make an HTTP request. And if I do that, then I don't have to write like a very long HTTP client. I don't have to do any of that. It's really nice. I can just instead say, okay, here's a function called getMovies and return, well, this was the one that was doing the fake data, but this is the one doing it with the HTTP. So here I'm saying use the HTTP service and use this.http get and then this movie URL. And you can see here, that's the API request followed by the term, followed by the API key. And when I'm done, it's going to return me, like I promised, those JSON movies from this particular URL. And then I'll be able to put those movies back into, let's see here. I'll be able to get the movies here, and then I can pass them into found movies. And found movies is another private variable. Who here is familiar with React and props? Okay, all right, so it works very similar. So if I look at my search component HTML, I did it this way because I was a little lazy. But what I did was I put my movie listings, that's the next component, in the same file as my search component HTML. And I said, I did that because I wanted to be able to pass the found movies variable as a prop to the movies, well, the found movies value to the movies prop that I'm passing this particular component. So you can think of this as parent, and that's child. So I'm passing that down to my child component, which is app movie listings. And if I go over to movie listings, you'll see I'm using these directives again. So ng if, hey, if we have the movies, show the movies. Otherwise, if we don't, then show this view, no movies. No movies yet, why don't you search for some? Here, if we have movies, we're going to render a table. We're going to have a poster movie year, and then ng4. For let m of movies, I want to show a movie listing, right? Not a movie listings, but a movie listing component. And that's the last one here. Movie listing component renders a column, table column, and there's my link, there's my image, there's my movie name, there's my movie year. And then, of course, you know, we just have a few more things in here. If you're going to pass movies from one parent to a child, you must use, well, I don't want to get too complicated. Like I said, I might save some of this for later, but basically I must use more of the Angular framework. I must use input to be able to receive the movie as a movie component here to be able to use it. So let's see here. In order for me to receive that private variable, I have to have something called input. It's a this is an ng module. And it needs to be able to be set in order for me to receive those movies and pass it again as a prop, again, downwards to this particular component. So yeah, does everybody kind of see how Angular works? Does that help kind of give you a pretty good breakdown of how this app can finally be built? So yeah, try it out. Like I said, there's a lot to explore. If we go back to this stack blitz, right, you can, I'll do some of these commands for you. You can, there's a product list, you can generate another one, generate a component, and I guess we can call it product to details. And oops, I guess I generated it in here. We can undo that. But let's do it at the app level. Okay, and it's actually supposed to be at the app level. All right, so here you can see I've got the CSS, the HTML, and the products details component. Then, let's see here, I'm getting an error. Okay, fixed error. All right, so, and this is just a basic one right here. So if I go over to, I think the thing to do here is probably like mess around with this. So it says products. You can do something like hello if you want here. You see that instantly like shows up. If you want to go in here and like say, okay, products. And I have to be careful with the way I write this. It doesn't just like, show you whatever you want. You have to be careful sometimes of, the way that things are typed.
Wait, the product's already defined, it's going to throw an error.
Yeah. So basically, I could probably do that in here. So here, if I want to mess around with this, I could just say, all right, instead of phone XL, I can put L. I can do $5.99. And then here, if I want to go in here, I can do products. And that's, you're right, it's going to show object, object, object. So I need to do, like a ng for loop. Yeah. Okay, so p.name, and actually if I want to get this working, I just need to make sure I map it correctly. So there it is. So I have 3. You can see I have product phone L, phone mini, phone standard. And if I want to keep playing around with it, I can. I just have to map it to whatever it is. So, like I said, it's a little bit of a learning curve, but once you spend time in it, it starts picking up and you're like, oh, okay, I got this. It's not too much. You will probably be referencing the documentation a lot, but that's to be expected. I mean, this is not, chump change. Okay, so the last thing I'm going to do here is probably just show you a little bit about me again, right? So if you want to learn ECMAScript 6, I did write this book on Amazon. And if you, I'll show you that link in a second. So if you go to amazon.com and you type in survive programming, that's the full title. Guide to ES6. Something like that. I think even if you just type ES6, you'll find me. That's me. A roadmap to ES6. Again, if you get the book, it helps us support the group. So that would help me a lot. And I think you can get this for free also if you have Kindle Unlimited. So that's cool too. Then I also have the video course that I mentioned, and that's just hackbuddy.com. And like I mentioned before, we'll probably have more programming courses there. Like I said, I have taught for General Assembly. I'm teaching currently for Thinkful. I have a lot of students who have, given me testimonials. I hope you will too from tonight. So yeah, I am the maintainer of this group, JavaScript LA, and I invite anybody, who is proficient at code. We've had some people from the past. Matt Hipley is one of them. So he gave a talk on history of JavaScript, which I believe he did at the beginning when we started at Farmers, which was pretty cool. If you are interested in a specific area, because I did kind of go through this in a very like bird's eye view. If you want me to talk about a specific part of this, right, like services in more detail or observables in more detail, let me know, because we can always do that and get more complicated. I really want to hear from you guys, because we have a lot of people who are learning JavaScript for the first time, but then we also have a lot of mid-level developers who come to these groups, and I feel like anytime we have a very complicated topic, more people show up, and it's a mix of beginner and mid-level, and sometimes there are those senior level people, but I feel like a lot of people really want us to like push on the hard stuff, because it's like you're getting like a free course. So yeah, just let me know, and we'll try to direct it that way. And yeah, thanks for coming. If you like this group, there's also, you can get a shirt. That's what this thing is saying. And be sure to get a sticker if you didn't. That's free. And otherwise, we'll see you at the next meetup. Thank you for coming today. Oh yeah, Firebase. Okay, real quick. That's a good question. It was in the thing. Okay, so Firebase is really, really simple, right? What I did here is, I've already done this, but what you would do is you would go to firebase.com. I think it's firebase.com. Sometimes it's firebaseapp.com, which you have to be careful with. What you would do is you would go to the console here, and you would create a project, like I did here. And then you would give it a name, go through all the instructions. Then after that, you would go over to your app. You would do you would do Firebase init. And you have to make sure you've installed the Firebase CLI too, in order for this to work. So once you do that, and let me just make sure I have Firebase. Yeah, I probably don't on this machine, which is interesting. I think it's npm install Firebase, but let's just see. Yeah. So npm install -g Firebase tools. And that'll run. Then after that, I would use Firebase login, and then I would do an I think it's ng build -- prod. So I would take my Angular app, build it for production. What that'll do is it'll give me a dist folder, which is just an index HTML, the simplified, minified CSS and JavaScript file. That's it. Then I would point my Firebase, after I've logged in, I would point my Firebase to that app that I created in the console, and then I would deploy this particular app to Firebase, that dist folder. And then once that's done, I would have my app on Firebase. So let's try this. Okay, so the first question it's going to ask me is, hey, we track you. And so are you cool with tracking? So I'm going to say, yeah, whatever. Okay, so then the second thing it's going to do is have me log in. So I log in, press allow. Now Google knows everything about me. All right, cool. Now I see that I'm logged in. Now I can do Firebase init. And then I get this cool little thing. You'll want to pick hosting. So don't just hit enter, you'll have to hit your space bar. So you get this little mark. Press enter, and then it's going to ask me, where's your public folder? So I don't have one, so actually I would need to quit this. I can do a Command C and do instead ng build -- prod, right? And then hit enter. It will build the app, and then afterwards I would go through this tutorial again and then finally finish out with the Firebase deploy. And if all goes well, then I'll basically be able to go to there, and that's where my app will be hosted. And I believe I click hosting here, it'll give me the URL, which I can click, and I can show to anybody. So that's how you do it.
Cool.
Yeah, Firebase makes it a lot easier than having to like set up your own web server. So use it. It's free. Thank you guys for coming.